Dallas, late November. A 40-story tower of glass and steel, lit against a darkening sky. Inside, 40 people are finishing dinner. The wine is poured. The candles are burning. No one in that room knows the sensor behind the kitchen wall has been sending the wrong signal for 11 minutes. No one except the man in the gray uniform. He's in the service corridor. Alone. His hand pressed flat against the insulation casing, reading heat the way other men read words.
Find a way out.
Listen
Found
up.
this problem 6
We have a
days
critical
ago.
situation.
He filed the report.
The core is
They said
unstable.
Monday.
We need to
Tonight
move
is
now.
Friday. Somewhere below him, his daughter is painting a picture of this building with a beating heart at its center. She doesn't know her father is 3 floors above her. In the dark, in a corridor, no guest will ever see. The sensor spikes, the shutter begins to drop. And the man who was never supposed to matter reaches for the panel. The alarm didn't wake Kenneth Lee. He was already up. That's how it had been for 7 years, ever since the army. Ever since coming home to a life that looked nothing like the one he left. His body still ran on military time, even when there was no mission, no perimeter to check, no men depending on him to stay sharp. Now the only person depending on him was 10 years old and still asleep down the hall. He moved through the small Dallas apartment the way he moved through everything. Quietly, efficiently, no wasted steps. The kitchen light came on. Coffee started. He pulled out the cutting board and got to work on Emily's lunch. Turkey sandwich, no mustard. Apple slices. The little bag of goldfish crackers she'd been obsessed with for 2 months straight. Sybil stuff. The kind of stuff that filled up a life. He heard her before he saw her. Little feet on the hallway floor. The shuffle of someone who was awake but not quite ready to admit it. Emily came around the corner, hair sticking up on one side, eyes still half closed. She was wearing the oversized t-shirt she'd claimed from his drawer 6 months ago. The one from a 5K run he'd done in 2019. She wore it like a blanket. Morning, she said. Her voice was still rough with sleep. Morning, Em. She climbed up onto the kitchen stool and watched him finish the sandwich. Didn't say anything for a minute, just watched. She did that sometimes. Just sat with him in the quiet. He'd learned to appreciate it. Not every 10-year-old could do that. Sit with someone without needing to fill the space. She got that from him, maybe, or maybe she just understood without being told, that some mornings the quiet was the best part. You nervous? She asked. He didn't look up from the apple he was slicing. About what? Tonight, he paused for just a second. Then kept slicing. No, Emily tilted her head, the way she always did when she knew he wasn't telling the whole truth. You look nervous. I look like I'm making your lunch. You're cutting those apple slices thinner than usual. He looked down. She wasn't wrong. He set the knife down, looked at her. A little, he admitted. Maybe a little nervous. She nodded like that was the right answer, like she'd been waiting for him to say something real. That's okay, she said. Nervous just means you care. He didn't say anything to that. Just finished packing her lunch, after breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. He stood behind her at the bathroom mirror and braided her hair. This was their routine. Had been since she was 6, when she'd looked up at him with complete confidence and said, "You're going to learn how to do this, Dad." Not a question. A statement of fact, so he'd learned. He wasn't fast. He wasn't fancy. But he was consistent, and Emily said his braids stayed in all day, which was the whole point. In the mirror, he watched her face while he worked. She was looking at her own reflection with that serious expression she got sometimes. Thinking about something, he waited. "Is it a nice place?" she asked. "Where you're going tonight?" "It's fine." "What kind of fine?" He thought about that. The kind with cloth napkins. She wrinkled her nose. "I don't understand why cloth napkins are a good thing. You just have to wash them after. You're not wrong. What's her name?" He tied off the braid, met her eyes in the mirror. "Sandra. Is she nice?" "I don't know yet." Emily considered this with the seriousness of a small philosopher. "Donald thinks she's nice. Donald thinks a lot of things." She smiled at that. Just a little. When he finished the braid, she inspected it in the mirror, turning her head left and right. Then she gave a single nod of approval. The royal decree had been issued. The braid was acceptable. She jumped down from the stool and ran back to her room to get her backpack. Kenneth stood at the mirror alone for a moment. He looked at himself. The gray coming in at his temples now. The lines around his eyes that weren't there when he'd shipped out the first time 22 years old, and certain he understood the world. He didn't look like a man who was going on a date. He looked like what he was. A maintenance worker. A father. A man who'd come back from places most people only read about, and who traded in one uniform for another. He was okay with that. Most days he was completely okay with that. He turned off the bathroom light and went to find his keys. On the kitchen table he found something new. A folded piece of paper, placed right next to his travel mug. He opened it. Emily had drawn it that morning while he wasn't looking. A figure, tall, straight-backed, standing in front of a building. Arms at the sides, head up, chest out. The way soldiers stand when they want you to know they're not afraid. Underneath, in big block letters, "Go get 'em, Dad." He stood there for a moment with the drawing in his hands. Then he folded it carefully, put it in his shirt pocket right over his chest. He'd carry it all day. The walk to work took 22 minutes. Kenneth didn't take the bus. Hadn't in 3 years. The walk was part of the routine. It helped him think. Or more accurately, it helped him stop thinking. There was something about putting one foot in front of the other, in the cool morning air, watching Dallas wake up, that settled whatever was loose inside him. He passed the corner of Maple and Henderson. Same as every morning, and same as most mornings, the man was there. His name was Roy. Kenneth knew that because he'd asked, about a year ago. Just stopped and asked. Roy was 61 years old. He'd done 2 tours in Vietnam as a Navy corpsman, come home, worked construction for 20 years, lost his wife, lost his apartment, and ended up here. Under the overhang of a laundromat on the corner of Maple and Henderson, they didn't talk much. Roy wasn't a big talker. Kenneth respected that. He set the paper bag down beside Roy. Egg biscuit from the gas station, orange juice. Roy nodded once. Kenneth nodded back and kept walking. It wasn't charity. That's not how Kenneth thought about it. It was just, Roy was there. Roy had served. Roy had earned more than a doorway. And if Kenneth could do something small every morning that cost him $4.30, then not doing it would be the strange choice. Simple as that. He reached Caldwell Tower at 7:15. The building was 40 stories of glass and steel in uptown Dallas. Opened in 2008 by Gerald, now Gary Young, who'd built it after retiring from the Navy. Most of the employees called it the Tower. The lobby was all polished stone and indirect lighting, a fountain that never quite stopped running. Security desk with 2 guards who knew Kenneth by sight. He took the service entrance on the side. The one most people walked past without noticing. That was fine. Kenneth had always preferred the less noticed door. He changed into his work uniform in the maintenance locker room. Dark gray shirt, dark gray pants, steel-toed boots. His name was on the shirt, K. Lee. He clipped his radio to his belt, loaded up his tool bag, and checked the morning task sheet. Timothy Clark was already at his desk when Kenneth came in. Tim was 58, 15 years at the tower, built like a former linebacker who'd gone slightly soft around the middle. He ran maintenance with the low-key efficiency of someone who'd seen everything and stopped being surprised by any of it. Morning, Lee. Tim didn't look up from his clipboard. Morning, HVAC filter change on 2 is first. Then the elevator sensors on 4 and 5 need a calibration check. Building services wants the lobby fountain pump looked at before noon. He flipped a page. And whatever's going on with the smoke sensor on 12. Management wants that noted before the dinner rush tonight. Kenneth was writing it all down. He stopped at the last item, define noted, looked at, assessed, determine if it needs immediate attention, and if it does, Tim finally looked up. Then we document it and bring it to building management, and if building management says leave it, a pause. Then we document that too. Kenneth wrote it down, said nothing else. He worked through the morning with the same quiet focus he brought to everything. The HVAC filters on the 2nd floor, the elevator sensors, which turned out to be a simple recalibration. 40 minutes, done. The fountain pump had a worn seal that he replaced from stock. He didn't need to be told twice about any of it. He didn't need to be supervised. He just saw what needed doing and did it, moving through the building's back corridors and service passages like he was part of its anatomy. In a lot of ways, he was. He knew this building the way you know a place you've studied under pressure. Every load-bearing wall, every junction in the ventilation system, which service elevator ran slow after cold nights, which fire doors sometimes stuck in humid weather. He'd learned all of it on purpose, the way he'd learned terrain in other places. Because knowing the ground beneath your feet was never wasted effort. The smoke sensor on 12 was last. He took the service stairs up to the 12th floor just before 11. The Crown Room restaurant occupied most of 12. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city views, the kind of menu that didn't list prices. The dinner event tonight was a private booking. 40 guests, according to the sheet. The sensor was in the service corridor behind the kitchen. Kenneth pulled up the panel and ran a full diagnostic. What he found made him go still. The readings were inconsistent. Not alarming, not yet. But the pattern was wrong. There was a temperature differential in the auxiliary duct that shouldn't have been there. The insulation at a specific joint was registering two different thermal profiles, which meant one of two things. Either the sense itself was faulty, or there was actual thermal separation happening behind the wall. He traced the duct manually, ran his hand along the insulation casing, found the spot, about 8 feet in, where the auxiliary line branched off the main duct. The insulation wrap had slipped, not completely off, just shifted, enough that heat could pool in a small pocket, enough that if something in the kitchen generated a spike, a flare, an overheated pan, the sensor would get confused. Read the pooled heat as ambient temperature, maybe send a normal signal when it should be sending an alarm, or, depending on how the confusion cycled, activate the wrong part of the emergency response system. The emergency shutters on 12 were old, installed in the original 2008 build and never fully upgraded. They were supposed to slide up, lock open, allow evacuation. But Kenneth had read the maintenance history. In 3 documented cases over the past decade, the shutters had half dropped and stuck instead of staying up. Wedged in the guides, he stood in that service corridor for a long moment, his hands still on the insulation. Then he took out his work phone and documented everything. Photos, written notes, thermal readings, the exact location of the insulation slip, the duct dimensions, the distance to the nearest shutter mechanism. He filed the report through the maintenance system at 11:14 a.m. At 11:52, the response came back from building management. Thank you for flagging. Dinner event this evening cannot be moved. Private booking, 40 guests, prepaid. Recommend full assessment Monday morning. Please note as reviewed. Kenneth read it twice. Then he read it a third time. He picked up his radio. Tim, yeah, the sensor report on 12. Management came back with a Monday call. A pause. Yeah, I see it, Tim. There's an insulation slip in the auxiliary duct behind the kitchen. If the kitchen runs hot tonight. I know, Lee. The shutters on that floor, I know. Tim's voice was quieter now. Not dismissive. More like a man who knew he was standing in the middle of two forces and didn't have the power to move either of them. It's above my call. They've reviewed it. It's documented. It's documented as reviewed. Not as fixed. That's the call, Lee. I'm sorry. Kenneth stood in the service corridor a little longer after the radio went quiet. The fluorescent light above him hummed. A distant elevator descended somewhere inside the building's bones. He thought about 40 guests. A full kitchen running at dinner capacity. Heat and oil and open flame, which was every kitchen's reality, the thing you managed every night, and sometimes didn't quite manage it enough. He thought about the insulation slip, the confused sensor, the shutters with their documented history of half dropping and sticking. Then he thought about what he could do within his own authority, without overstepping, without touching systems he didn't have clearance to shut down. He couldn't fix the joint properly without taking the duct offline. That required management sign-off he didn't have. But he could reduce the risk of the sensor misreading. He spent the next 90 minutes doing exactly that. He recalibrated the sensor's reporting threshold to compensate for the thermal differential he'd measured. He secured the loose insulation wrap as best he could from the accessible side, using the materials in his tool bag. He tagged the junction with a maintenance flag so anyone who opened that panel would see immediately that it was a known issue. He couldn't solve it, but he could make it less likely to fail catastrophically. When he was done, he added everything he'd done to his report. Every detail. Timestamped. He filed the updated report at 1:47 p.m., and then he went back to the rest of his day, because that was the job. The children's art event happened on the first Friday of every month. It had been running for 3 years. Gary Young had started it as part of a community outreach program, free workshop, open to any kids in the surrounding neighborhoods, supplies provided. Instructors came from the local community college arts program. The atrium cleared out a section of tables near the east window, and for 3 hours, it became the noisiest, most colorful corner of a building that was otherwise designed to be quiet and controlled. Kenneth had always liked it, not because he was sentimental about kids painting, more because there was something honest about it. Children didn't care that they were in an upscale building. They didn't dress differently, or speak differently, or perform for the surroundings. They just painted, and made a mess, and sometimes argued about who had the good brushes. He finished his afternoon rounds and came through the atrium just as the event was getting started. He needed to check the overhead vents. In past months, the airflow had been strong enough to send loose papers sliding off the tables. A small adjustment had fixed it last time. He wanted to make sure it was still holding. He was on the second rung of his stepladder, adjusting the vent louver, when he heard his name. Dad, he looked down. Emily was standing at the edge of the event area, backpack still on, eyes bright. She'd spotted him from across the atrium before he'd even seen her come in. That was her talent. She could find him in any room. He climbed down. She crossed to him at a half run. Not a full run, because she was 10. And apparently 10 was old enough to know that full running in public was embarrassing, but also young enough that she couldn't quite hold it to a walk when she was happy. She stopped in front of him and looked up. "You're still here?" she said. "Still on the clock. Good." She grabbed his hand and pulled. "Come see what I'm going to paint." He let himself be pulled. Her station was near the window. A blank sheet of heavy paper, a palette of colors, brushes in a mason jar of water that was already slightly gray from a previous rinse. She'd been thinking about this painting for 2 weeks. She'd mentioned it at dinner, at breakfast, in the car, in the middle of conversations about completely unrelated things. She stood in front of the blank paper now and pointed. "It's going to be the building," she said, "but like alive, like it has a heart. And there are these lines that go out from the center like..." She waved her hands, searching for the word. "Like veins. Like a body." He looked at the blank paper. Tried to picture it. "Because buildings are like bodies," she said, they very seriously. "They have systems, and if the systems break, the building gets sick. And someone has to keep them healthy." He didn't say anything. "That's you," she added. "Just in case he hadn't understood, I figured," he said. She picked up a brush, considered her colors, and began. He stood there for a few minutes and watched her work. She was already focused, already in that state she got where the rest of the world went blurry. He knew that state. He recognized it. He'd felt it himself, in different circumstances, in rooms that were nothing like this one. "Go finish your work," she said, without looking up. "You're watching too hard." He almost smiled. "I'll be in the atrium at 4:30, he said. "I know." He picked up his stepladder and his tool bag and went back to the day, but he kept the image of her in his peripheral vision as he moved through the atrium, the way she bent over the paper, the way she held the brush like it mattered. Some things, he thought, you just hold on to. He was replacing a faulty ballast in the 8th floor corridor when he heard Sandra Anderson's voice. It came from behind a conference room door that was about 3 inches from fully closed. Not open enough to be an invitation, but not closed enough to keep sound from carrying into the hallway. He wasn't eavesdropping. He was 14 feet away, on a step ladder, with a fluorescent fixture open in front of him. He was just doing his job. But the voice carried. And the words were clear. "Honestly, I should have known when I saw the confirmation. A maintenance guy. Donald actually set me up with a maintenance guy." A laugh. Light, easy, the kind of laugh that wasn't trying to be cruel. I don't know what he was thinking. A second voice lower. Amused. "What did he look like?" "Fine, I guess. I mean clean. Showed up clean, which I suppose is something." Another laugh. "But he had this look. You know the look. Like the building hired him, not like he was visiting the building. And when the waiter asked if he was there for a maintenance call..." Laughter from the room. "2 people, maybe 3. I just couldn't. I really just couldn't. I told him it wasn't going to work and I left." "You just left? Didn't finish the drink?" "I'd had 1 sip. It wasn't worth it." More laughter. Kenneth kept his eyes on the ballast. His hands were steady. They were always steady. He'd trained that into himself, in places where unsteady hands got people killed. The steadiness was a tool, like anything else. It didn't mean he didn't feel things. He felt this, not anger. Anger was something he'd mostly burned out of himself over the years. What he felt was closer to a settling. The sensation of a thing you'd half-hoped might be different, confirming itself as exactly what you'd suspected. He'd known, at some level. When she'd laughed in the restaurant, when she'd stood up, when her heels had clicked across the floor like punctuation. He'd known what that meant. He'd still hoped he was wrong. He wasn't. He finished the ballast replacement, screwed the fixture cover back on, folded the ladder, picked up his tool bag. He walked to the end of the corridor, turned the corner, and stopped. The men's room was right there. He went in, stood at the sink, ran the cold water, put his hands under it, looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like what he was. A man in a gray uniform, in a building's hallway. On a Friday afternoon, he had calluses on his hands from work. He had gray at his temples from the years. He had a scar on his left forearm that sometimes got questions when he wore short sleeves. And he always said, "work accident," because it was simpler than the truth. He looked like exactly what Sandra Anderson had seen across that restaurant table. And the thing was, she wasn't wrong, exactly. He was a maintenance worker. That was real. He did fix things in this building every day. He did know every duct and pipe and junction better than most people in this city knew their own homes. That wasn't something to be ashamed of. But it also wasn't everything. That was the part that sat heavy. Not that she'd judged him. People judged. That was just human. What was heavy was the realization that no matter what he'd done before, no matter where he'd been or what he'd carried or who he'd gotten home, this was what was visible. This uniform, this tool bag, this role, everything else was invisible. His army ID was in a box in his bedroom closet. His service record existed somewhere in a government database he'd never looked at again after discharge. His deployments were memories that surfaced on their own schedule, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, usually quiet. None of it showed. He stood at the sink for another minute. Then he thought about Emily, downstairs in the atrium, bent over a paper painting a building with a heart. Waiting for him at 4:30, he thought about what she'd said that morning. Nervous just means you care. He turned off the water, dried his hands, looked at himself one more time. He was not going to carry last night into this afternoon. Not because it didn't matter. It did. But because what mattered more was who he was going to be when Emily looked up from her painting and found him standing there. He wanted to be the man in her drawing, head up, chest out, not afraid. He picked up his tool bag and walked back out into the hallway. The crown room was everything. The crown room was designed to be warm light from fixtures that cost more than Kenneth's monthly rent. Tables set with enough silverware to confuse people who hadn't grown up with this kind of thing. A view of the Dallas skyline that did what good views always do. Made you feel like you were somewhere that mattered. Kenneth arrived at 6:58. He wore the same thing he'd worn last month to the teacher appreciation dinner at Emily's school. Dark slacks. A button-down shirt in a deep navy blue. He'd ironed it that morning while Emily was getting her backpack ready. His shoes were the good ones. Black leather, not new but well kept. He'd polished them the night before with the kit he kept under the bathroom sink. He looked presentable. He knew that. He also knew that presentable meant different things in different rooms. The hostess showed him to the table. A two-top near the windows. He ordered water and the house bread and looked at the menu while he waited. He thought about Roy on the corner of Maple and Henderson. Roy had served on the USS Sanctuary as a corpsman, had treated wounded men under fire on more than one occasion, had come home and built a life, and then lost it piece by piece the way people do, not through any single dramatic failure, but through accumulated weight. He was 61 years old, sleeping under a laundromat overhang, and most of the people who walked past him every morning didn't see a veteran. They saw a man who had failed. Kenneth thought about that a lot. He thought about what we see when we look at someone, and what we miss. Sandra Anderson arrived at 7:05. She was what he'd expected from Donald's description. Well-dressed, composed. The kind of person who moved through upscale spaces the way a key moves through its intended lock. No friction, no hesitation. She had dark hair and sharp eyes and the particular kind of confidence that came not from being certain of yourself, but from rarely being questioned. She looked at him, and he watched the calculation happen, fast, almost imperceptible. But he'd spent years reading people in rooms where reading people incorrectly had consequences. He could see it. The slight adjustment in her posture, the social temperature dropping by a degree. But she sat down. They ordered drinks, made introductions. She asked how he knew Donald. He told her. They'd served together, he said. Kept it brief. She asked what he did now, and he told her. Building maintenance, Caldwell Tower. He watched her face. She kept hers controlled. Polite for about 8 minutes. Then the waiter came. He was young. New. Probably hadn't been at the Crown Room long enough to know all the regulars. He approached the table, looked at Kenneth. At the calloused hands on the table, at the haircut. At whatever specific combination of signals human beings broadcast without knowing it. And said, with genuine and complete innocence, "Good evening, sir. Are you here about the service request?" The kitchen mentioned they had an issue with the, "I'm a guest." Kenneth said. The waiter went red. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I thought. "It's fine," and it was. Honestly, mistakes happened. The waiter had made an incorrect read and then corrected it. No harm, but Sandra laughed, not at the waiter, at the situation, at the absurdity of it, from her point of view. The laugh came out before she could stop it, and it wasn't quiet. And then she didn't stop it. "Oh God," she said, pressing her fingers to her mouth, but the laugh kept going, the shoulders shaking slightly. I'm sorry, it's just." She got herself under control, took a breath. She looked at him, and he could see the moment she decided. It was a small moment, a flicker. The way a door swings on its hinge before you've committed to opening or closing it. And she swung it shut. She put her napkin on the table. "I'm sorry," she said. Not with heat, not with cruelty, with the calm, almost business-like efficiencies of someone closing a transaction that hadn't worked out. I don't think this is going to work. I'm sorry for wasting your time." She stood up, picked up her bag, and left. Her heels were sharp on the stone floor, steady and unhurried, like she was walking out of a meeting that had run long. At the table next to them, a couple looked away quickly. The waiter had retreated to the far side of the room. Kenneth sat for a moment. He drank a small amount of his water. Then he took out his wallet, counted out enough to cover both their drinks, and left it on the table, folded under the bread plate. He didn't wait for the check. He knew what it would be. He'd looked at the menu. He stood, straightened his shirt, and he walked out, not in the same direction as Sandra. He took the long way around past the bar, toward the far exit that led to the service corridor's stairwell. The stairwell he used every day. He pushed through the door and stood in the concrete quiet of it. The dinner sounds of the crown room disappeared behind him. It was just the hum of the building now, the mechanical pulse of it. Systems running, temperatures regulated, air moving through ducts. He knew every sound. He put his hand flat against the wall. The building was warm under his palm. Not hot, just alive. The way buildings are alive when everything in them is running right. He stood there for 60 seconds, maybe 90. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out Emily's drawing. He unfolded it carefully. "Get M, Dad," the tall figure. Head up, chest out. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it back up, put it back in his pocket, and started down the stairs. He had a daughter to get home to. The apartment was warm when he came in. The lamp in the living room was on, which meant Emily had gotten home from her after-school program and set herself up with homework, the way she always did. He could hear the TV on low in the background. The nature documentary channel she'd been working through all month. She heard him at the door. "Dad?" "Yeah, it's me." She appeared in the hallway. Still in her school clothes, braids still in from that morning. He'd done good work. She looked at his face the way she always did. That quick, careful read. "How was it?" He thought about what to say. "The restaurant was nice," he said. "That's not what I asked." He sat down on the couch. She came and sat next to him, close enough that her shoulder touched his arm. "It didn't work out," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she put her head against his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. Are you okay?" He thought about it. The real answer, not the easy one. "I will be," he said. "Yeah, I will be." She seemed to accept that. She stayed where she was, shoulder against his arm, and they sat in the quiet for a while. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at it. A text from Timothy Clark. "Management confirmed dinner event wrapped. 12 was fine tonight. See you Monday." Kenneth looked at the message. "Fine tonight." He put the phone face down. He thought about the insulation slip, the temperature differential he'd measured, the pattern of the readings, the shutter history he'd read in the maintenance logs. Fine tonight. He thought about 40 people up on 12 right now, finishing their dinner, never knowing that a man they'd never seen had spent 90 minutes that afternoon trying to reduce the risk of a system they'd never thought about. He thought about how that was most of his life. Actually, unseen work. Hidden effort. The kind of thing that only got noticed when it stopped. He didn't think that was a bad thing. Exactly. But he thought about it. Emily's breathing had gone slow and even. She'd fallen asleep against his arm. He sat very still so he wouldn't wake her. The nature documentary murmured on. Something about ocean currents. How they moved heat around the globe. Regulating temperature. Keeping things alive. How if they shifted, just slightly, just by a few degrees in the wrong direction, the effects could cascade in ways that were difficult to predict. Small systems. Big consequences. He thought about the insulation slip one more time. Then he reached over with his free hand and turned off the TV. He sat in the quiet of the apartment, Dallas outside, the city going about its Friday night, and Kenneth Lee, 44 years old, veteran, widower, father, maintenance technician, sitting still in the dark with his daughter asleep on his shoulder. Tomorrow would be Saturday. He'd make pancakes, take Emily to her soccer practice, maybe rent a movie in the evening. Monday he'd go back to 12 and fix what needed fixing. And tonight? Tonight he just sat with his daughter. That was enough. It had always been enough. The man in the walls. Kenneth made pancakes. That was the deal on Saturdays. Had been since Emily was 6. She got to pick the shape. He got to pick the toppings. The rule had never been officially established. It had just happened one morning and then kept happening, the way the best routines do. "Stars," Emily announced. She was sitting at the kitchen counter in her soccer cleats and shin guards, still wearing her pajama top, not yet ready to accept that Saturday morning had fully arrived. Stars are hard, you always say that. They're always hard, you always do them anyway. He poured the batter. He made stars. Imperfect ones because pancake batter had its own opinions about shape. But five-pointed, recognizable, the kind that made Emily pick up her fork with a specific satisfaction. They ate at the kitchen table. Outside, the morning was gray and cool. November in Dallas didn't commit to cold the way the northern states did. It just turned the light flat and made everything feel like it was waiting for something. Emily had her game at 10. He'd drop her off, watch from the sideline, drive her home, let her shower, and by then they'd both be ready for the afternoon. That was the plan. She was quiet through most of breakfast. He let her be. She was a thinker, Emily. She processed things internally, worked through them, and then, when she was ready, she said whatever she'd been working on. He'd learned not to rush it. Rushing it just made her close up. She was like him that way. He was on his second cup of coffee when she finally said it. Was it because of your job? He looked at her. What do you mean? Last night. Was it because of what you do? Because you work in the building? He set the mug down. Thought about how to answer that honestly without giving her something heavy to carry. I think it was partly that, he said. She looked at her plate, moved a piece of star-shaped pancake with her fork. That's not fair, she said. No. It isn't. You know everything about that building. You know how every single thing in it works. And Emily stopped, pressed her lips together. She doesn't know anything about anything. He almost smiled. You don't know that? I know she laughed at you. He went still. How do you know that? Donald texted me. He made a mental note to have a conversation with Donald about appropriate communication channels. Emily. He felt bad. She finally looked up. Her eyes were steady and serious. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, deep set, the kind that didn't flinch. He said she laughed in the restaurant and then left. And I just think, she stopped again. Drew a breath. I think if she knew what you actually were, she wouldn't have done that. What I actually am. You know what I mean? Tell me. She thought about it. The way she always thought before she said important things. Like she was choosing words the way you choose tools. Deliberately, you're someone who figures out what's broken, she said, and fixes it. Even when nobody asks you to. Even when nobody sees you doing it. He didn't say anything. That's a good thing to be, she said. That's actually a really good thing to be. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Go finish getting ready, he said. You're going to be late for your game. She pushed back her chair. But before she left the kitchen, she stopped. Dad? Yeah. The drawing I put on the table yesterday. Did you take it? It's in my shirt pocket. She looked at him for a second. Then she nodded once and walked down the hall. He sat at the table with his coffee going cold. Outside, the flat November light held. He went in early, 6:45, before Tim, before most of the cleaning crew had finished. He badged through the service entrance, went to the locker room, changed, and went straight to 12. The crown room was dark and quiet at that hour, chairs still up on tables. The smell of last night's kitchen, garlic and wine, and something charred that hadn't fully cleared the vents. He moved through the dining room, without turning the main lights on. He knew the space well enough. He went to the service corridor behind the kitchen, pulled the panel. The sensor readings had stabilized overnight. That was something. His recalibration had held. But the underlying problem was still there. The insulation slip, the thermal pocket, the potential for confusion if the kitchen ran hot again. He spent the next 2 hours fixing it properly. That meant taking the auxiliary duct segment offline. That meant a specific bypass procedure that required 2 people to be safe. But he'd done it alone before, in tighter spaces than this, and he knew how to manage the risk. He secured the bypass, opened the access panel, reseated the insulation wrap, and used metal-bonded tape to lock it in place. Then he tested it. Ran the sensor through a full cycle. Watched the readings. Clean. Consistent. No differential. He tagged the repair with a maintenance note, photographed everything, and filed a completion report at 8:52 a.m. Tim appeared in the service corridor doorway at 9:05 with 2 coffees. You already fixed it, yeah. Tim handed him one of the coffees. Management's going to want to know why you bypassed the Monday sign-off. I'll tell them I came in early and took care of a safety issue. Which is what I did. Tim drank his coffee. Fair. They stood in the service corridor for a moment. She's coming in today, Tim said, not looking at him. Sandra Anderson. Weekly walkthrough with her team, 9:30. Okay, you going to be all right? Tim, just asking? I'm always all right. Tim nodded slowly. He didn't push. That was the thing about Tim. He knew when to leave things alone. Lobby fountain needs the seal checked again, Tim said, and there's a service call on 7. Electrical, I'll get to it. He finished his coffee and got back to work. The morning passed the way good mornings did. Task to task, problem to solution, the building's needs met one by one. He replaced the lobby fountain seal. He traced the electrical fault on 7 to a loose junction box that had been slowly working itself free for probably 6 months. Fixed it, tagged it, filed it. He was on his way through the 8th floor corridor at 10:15 when he heard the voices. He wasn't looking for them. He turned the corner from the service access and found himself 20 feet from the open conference room door. Sandra was there in a blazer, hair back, standing at the head of the table. 3 other people. Weekly walkthrough meeting. He could have turned around. Could have taken the long route. He didn't. He kept his pace even and walked past the open door. She didn't see him. She was pointing at something on a screen. The Crown Room numbers from Friday night were strong, which is good. Private event came in on budget. No issues reported. He walked past, no issues reported. He thought about the insulation slip, the thermal differential, the sensor readings he documented on Friday morning, the response from management, Monday fix, no issues reported. He kept walking. At the end of the corridor, he stopped at the electrical panel he needed to check and opened it up. Stood there with his multimeter, running checks. His hands were steady. They were always steady. But something had shifted in his chest. Not anger. Heavier than anger. More like a long, slow confirmation of something he'd known for years, but tried not to let settle into certainty. Some things only got seen when they broke. The work that prevented the breaking. That was invisible by design. If he did his job right, nobody would ever know the shutter would have jammed. Nobody would ever know the sensor would have sent the wrong signal. Nobody would have to evacuate 40 dinner guests from a smoke-filled restaurant. Prevention didn't make the news. It didn't get reported at the weekly walkthrough. It just happened in service corridors and behind panels and in the early hours before anyone else arrived. Done by men and women in gray uniforms who knew the building better than the people who owned it. He closed the electrical panel, picked up his tool bag, moved it on to the next thing. The art event wasn't until Friday, but Emily had called during his lunch break. "Can I come after school?" Jess said she'd let me work on the painting some more. "I want to get the colors right on the lines, the lines, the lifelines. In the building, yeah. Come in through the main entrance. Text me when you get there." She texted him at 2:27. "Here, atrium. Jess has the good brushes today." He wrapped up the work he was doing on 3 and came through the atrium around 2:30. The space was quiet at this hour. Monday afternoon between the lunch crowd and the post-work rush. A few people with laptops at the cafe tables. A couple waiting for the elevator. The fountain running its low, steady sound in the background. Emily was at a table near the east window. Jess, the instructor, 26, paint-stained everything. The kind of person who brought the same level of focus to teaching a 10-year-old as she would to her own work, was sitting beside her, pointing at something on the paper. Kenneth came to stand nearby, not close enough to interrupt, just close enough to see. The painting was further along than Friday. Emily had laid down the base, the building in cool grays and blues, the kind of blue that Dallas glass turned in late afternoon light. From the center, she'd started the lines, deep red, almost burgundy, reaching outward like veins from a heart, or like roots, or like the way a crack moves through stone, or like a lot of things. Depending on how you looked at it, the density varies, Jess was saying. See how the lines thin out toward the edges? That's good. That's showing distance from the source. But here, she pointed at a section in the upper right, the lines are too uniform. What happens to blood pressure when it gets far from the heart? Emily thought about it. It drops, right? So what does that look like? Emily picked up a brush, thinned the paint slightly on the palette, started reworking the lines in the upper right corner. Kenneth watched her work. He thought about what she'd said Saturday morning. You're someone who figures out what's broken and fixes it, even when nobody asks you to, even when nobody sees you doing it. He thought about Roy on the corner of Maple and Henderson, about 8 years of $4 egg biscuits. About the way Roy never said thank you, not because he was ungrateful, but because he was proud. And thank you meant acknowledging a situation neither of them wanted to dwell on. He thought about the 36 men he'd served alongside over 3 deployments. The ones who came home, the ones who didn't, the ones who came home and then were slowly, quietly, stopped recognizing us by a world that had moved on while they were away. He thought about his wife, Carol. 11 years together, 7 married, gone at 38 from a cancer that announced itself in November and finished its business by the following June. He'd been a good husband, he'd been there. He'd done everything right and it hadn't mattered, because some things didn't respond to doing everything right. After she died, he'd had 2 options: fall apart or hold together. He'd chosen to hold together, not because he was strong. He was tired a lot of the time, if he was honest. But because Emily had needed him whole, so he'd stay whole, by choice. Every morning, every day. And the thing about staying whole was that after long enough, it stopped being a choice. It just became who you were. He was someone who fixed things, who stayed, who held the line quietly without applause. He hadn't picked that identity because it was noble. He'd picked it because it was necessary, because someone had to. Because if not him, then who? Emily looked up from the painting and found him watching. "Well?" she asked. "The upper right is better now." She turned back and looked critically at her own work. "It's still not right. Keep going. You'll get it." "How do you know?" He thought about it. "Because you don't stop when it's hard. You just adjust." She considered that. Then she picked up a slightly smaller brush and kept going. Friday came. The week had been ordinary in the way that good weeks were. Work, Emily, the apartment, the routine. He'd fixed a water pressure issue on 16. He'd replaced a motor in the parking structure ventilation system. He'd had a long conversation with Tim about the upcoming HVAC maintenance schedule and the budget implications of delaying 2 of the compressor replacements. Ordinary, necessary, invisible. Emily's art event was at 2. Her painting was finished. She'd declared it done on Thursday evening, studied it for a full minute from across the room, and then said, "Okay, that's it." The way artists do, apparently, at every age. He'd looked at it properly for the first time, the building, the heart. The lines radiating outward, varied in density, following some internal logic that made visual sense even if he couldn't fully articulate why. And in the center, she'd added something he hadn't noticed her working on, a figure small. Just a silhouette, standing at the place where all the lines converged. Touching the wall, not heroic, not dramatic. Just present, just there, is that? "It's just a person," she said. "Any person. The person who stays." He didn't say anything for a moment. "It's good, Em. I know," she said simply, and went to bed. Friday afternoon, the atrium filled up for the event. Tables, paint, kids, parents, the particular beautiful chaos of children who had been given permission to make something. Kenneth finished his afternoon rounds and came through to check the overhead vents. The adjustment from last month was holding. Good. He was coming off the ladder when his radio clicked. Lee, Tim's voice. "Yeah, where are you?" "Atrium. Just finished the vent check." A pause. "You hear anything from 12 in the last 10 minutes? Kenneth went still. "No. Why?" "We got a fluctuation on the board. Small, but it's showing on the sensor you recalibrated Monday." "What kind of fluctuation?" "Thermal spike. Inconsistent. Looks like a reading error, but..." "I'm going up, Lee. It might be nothing. Kitchen's been running. I'm going up." He pulled the radio off his belt. Found Emily at her table, 3 brushes in one hand, paper towel in the other, completely absorbed. He crouched down beside her. She looked up. "I need to go check something," he said. "Stay here with Jess. Don't leave the atrium." "Okay?" She read his face. Fast, like she always did. "Is it the building?" "Probably nothing. I just need to look." "Okay." No argument. No panic. She trusted him the way she'd trusted him her whole life. Completely, quietly, without conditions. "Come back when you're done. I will." He stood up. Looked at Jess, who'd been watching the exchange. "Can you keep an eye on her?" "Of course," Jess said. He moved toward the service stairwell, the thermal spike on the sensor. He thought about the insulation repair he'd done Monday. He'd been thorough. He'd done it right. But there was a second junction point about 6 feet down the auxiliary duct, one he hadn't had access to from Monday's angle. He'd noted it in his report, flagged it as a secondary check item. Secondary check items sometimes came back. He pushed through the stairwell door. The smell reached him on the second landing. Faint. Could be mistaken for something else. But he'd been in enough buildings, enough situations, to know what he was smelling. Not smoke. Not yet. But something pre-smoke. The way the air changed before the air changed. A slight warmth that shouldn't be there. A density. He took the remaining stairs 2 at a time, cleaved into the 12th floor service corridor. The smell was stronger here. Not choking, but real. He went straight to the sensor panel. The readings were spiking and dropping in a pattern he recognized. Not random. Cyclic. The sensor was registering heat, losing the signal, registering it again. The second junction point, the one he hadn't reached Monday, was cycling in and out of the thermal pocket. He looked down the corridor toward the kitchen access door. A thin line of gray had appeared at the bottom of the door. Not thick, not dramatic, but there. He had about 90 seconds to decide what to do and then stop deciding. He keyed his radio. Tim 12, kitchen smoke. Not an alarm situation yet, but it will be. Get maintenance to the emergency shutter panel and get building security to start soft evacuation on the dining room. Don't trigger the full alarm yet. I don't want a stampede, Lee. Move fast, Tim. He pushed through the kitchen access door. The kitchen was chaos. The kind of chaos that happened fast without warning. To people who were trained for pressure, but not for this specific configuration of pressure. Scott Hill, junior cook, second week, had overloaded the induction burner with a cast iron pan and then stepped away to get something from the cold storage. The pan had superheated. The oil in it had passed its smoke point and was pushing toward something worse. The hood vent above it had caught most of the smoke, but the vent was pulling into the auxiliary duct, the one with the compromised second junction, and the smoke was finding its way through. Kevin Perez, head chef, 8 years at the Crown Room, built like someone who'd spent those 8 years on his feet, had caught the situation and pulled the pan. But the smoke had already spread through the prep area. One of the line cooks was down on one knee, hand on the counter, coughing hard. 2 servers had backed against the far wall. Scott Hill was standing in the middle of it, looking at the downed cook with an expression that said he understood exactly what he'd caused and couldn't process it fast enough to do anything about it. Kenneth moved. Kevin, his voice cut through the noise the way voices did when they didn't ask our permission to be heard. East exit. Get your people out. Go. Kevin looked at him. 1 second of assessment. Something in Kenneth's face or voice or both settled the question. Marcus, on your feet, Kevin said to the downed cook. Sarah Tyler, east door, move. He turned back to the prep station and started shutting down the burners methodically. One by one, Kenneth went to Marcus, the cook on one knee, checked his airway, checked his pulse. Smoke inhalation, mild. Disoriented but not in danger if he got clean air in the next 2 minutes. I've got you, Kenneth said. Arm over my shoulder. He walked Marcus out through the east exit. The clean air hit them in the service corridor, and Marcus started breathing better almost immediately. Kenneth positioned him against the wall, checked him again. Stay here. Don't go back in. Marcus nodded, still catching his breath. Kenneth went back. The kitchen was cleaner now. Kevin had gotten everyone out, and the burners were off. But the smoke from the duct was still seeping through, and through the swing door to the dining room, Kenneth could hear the sounds of a room that had not yet descended into panic but was close. He pushed through. The Crown Room at 5:47 p.m. was about half full. Dinner service had just started. The smoke was light in here. The dining room had better ventilation than the kitchen, but it was visible near the ceiling, moving. And people were noticing. 3 tables had already stood up. A woman near the window was calling for the manager. 2 older men near the back were looking at the exit signs with the focused attention of people calculating routes. Kenneth looked at the main exit, the shutter. It had dropped 6 inches. Not fully down, not jammed, but moving, and moving in the wrong direction. He crossed to the emergency panel on the wall beside the shutter. The panel that controlled the shutter's motor and the manual override. Don't touch that. The voice was calm, measured, used to being listened to. Kenneth turned. Gary Young was standing 4 feet away. He was 67, built lean, with the kind of posture that didn't come from a gym, but from decades of having to stand straight in rooms where posture communicated rank. He was in a suit. There was already a faint smudge of something, dust or ash, on his left sleeve from where he'd been helping a couple near the back find the secondary exit. Kenneth recognized him from the building's ownership documentation he'd reviewed when he first started the job. He'd never spoken to him. The shutter panel's been flagged as unstable, Gasry said. Maintenance documented 3 malfunction incidents. I know, Kenneth said. I read those reports. He turned back to the panel. The problem isn't the panel, it's the motor relay. The sensor confusion is sending it a partial activate signal. If I don't override it manually, it's going to finish dropping. And if you override it wrong, it won't. He opened the panel cover. I need about 45 seconds. Can you get those people away from the main exit and moving toward the secondary? A pause. Yes, Gary said. He moved. Kenneth heard him behind him, the clear, controlled voice directing guests away from the shutter, toward the secondary exit on the east side, keeping people low, keeping people moving, without the specific note of panic in his voice that turned orderly evacuations into something else. Kenneth worked the panel. The relay was cycling between 2 states. That was the problem. The confused sensor reading was creating an oscillating signal. Drop, stop, drop, stop. He needed to break the cycle and then command the shutter up. He isolated the relay, cut the sensor input, switched to direct motor control. The shutter stopped dropping. He reversed the command. The motor strained. The shutter shuddered. 2 inches up, 4. 6. It stuck. He checked the panel. The motor was fighting the weight of the shutter because the guide rail on the left side had a slight torque. Probably from the partial drop, putting stress on the mechanism. He applied steady counter pressure through the override. Held it. The shutter released from the torque and slid up. 8 inches. 10. Enough clearance to crawl through if necessary. He locked it in position and checked the motor reading. Stable. He turned around. The dining room was clearer. Gary had moved most of the guests. Kenneth could see them in the corridor beyond the secondary exit, standing, coughing lightly, but standing and breathing, and together. At the table by the window, Sandra Anderson was still sitting. She hadn't moved. She wasn't frozen in the dramatic sense. She wasn't paralyzed with fear, wasn't collapsed over the table. She was sitting very straight, hands flat on the tablecloth, looking at the smoke near the ceiling, with the expression of someone who had encountered a situation her planning hadn't accounted for, and hadn't yet found the response she was looking for. There was an older couple at the table next to her who were trying to stand and couldn't quite coordinate it. He moved to them first. He helped the woman to her feet, steadied the man, and guided them toward the secondary exit where Gary was coordinating. Then he came back. Sandra looked up at him. There was a moment. It was not a long moment. There was no time for long moments. But it was real, and both of them knew what it contained. He'd sat across from her 6 days ago. She'd laughed and stood up and left. He'd paid for both their drinks and walked out through a different door. She was looking at him now like she was trying to reconcile 2 different versions of the same person, and the math wasn't coming out right. The east corridor, he said. Secondary exit. Stay low, move steady, don't rush. She stood up, nodded once, moved toward the corridor. He didn't watch her go. He was already moving toward the service door, back into the kitchen, back to the second junction point in the auxiliary duct, the one that had started all of this. The smoke was thinner in the kitchen now. Kevin had done good work shutting down the burners, and without active heat sources, the duct was cooling. But the second junction was still open, still allowing the residual smoke to cycle through. He needed 3 minutes and the right tools. He had both. He got to work. The second junction was tighter than the first. He had to remove a section of the access panel casing to get his hands to the right angle. His knuckles scraped against the metal housing and came away with a thin line of red that he ignored. He found the slip point. Worse than the first junction, the insulation had come away almost entirely on one side. He reseated it, secured it, applied the metal-bonded tape in overlapping layers, tested the sensor. The readings cleared, 3 clean cycles. No differential. He replaced the access panel casing. The vent above him engaged, fully, cleanly, the way it was supposed to, and the remaining smoke began moving upward and out. He stood in the quiet kitchen. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from the specific physical letdown that followed sustained focus under pressure. He knew the feeling. He'd had it in other places, other buildings, situations with higher stakes and louder consequences. His body remembered how this felt. He pressed his hands flat against the prep counter for a moment. Breathed, then he picked up his radio. Tim, Lee, I've got building security on 12. Fire department is 3 minutes out. What's the status? Kitchen is clear. Duct system is repaired. Secondary junction is sealed. Smoke should be clearing from the dining room. A pause. You fixed the junction? In the middle of, that's what needed fixing. Another pause. You okay? Yeah, Emily's still in the atrium. Jess has her, I know. Tell her I'm coming down. He set the radio back on his belt. He walked through the kitchen, through the service corridor, and pushed through the stairwell door. The air in the stairwell was clean. He stood in it for a moment, let his lungs settle. Then he went down 2 flights. 1 flight. Ground floor. He pushed through the door into the atrium. The art event had paused. Parents had gathered their children at the tables. There was a quiet anxiety in the space. Word had traveled, the way word always traveled in a building, through phones and overheard conversations and the simple human telegraph of worried faces. He scanned the room, found Emily in 3 seconds. She was standing at the edge of her table, both hands at her sides. Her eyes were doing the thing they did, moving methodically through the space, checking faces, checking exits, looking for him. She was doing exactly what he'd taught her without ever teaching her. She found him at the same moment he found her. She crossed the space between them at a dead run. He caught her. She wrapped both arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest and didn't say anything. He held her with both arms, one hand on the back of her head, and stood still. He could feel her breathing, fast at first, then slowing, matching his. She pulled back and looked up at him. Her face was clear, no tears. She wasn't a crier, hadn't been since she was 7. She just looked at him with those dark brown eyes that saw everything. "You fixed it," she said, not a question. "Yeah." She looked at his right hand. The scrape on his knuckles. "You're bleeding, it's minor. Come on." She took his hand, carefully, avoiding the scrape, and led him back to her table. She opened her backpack and pulled out a small first aid kit that she'd been carrying since 4th grade. Ever since a scraped knee at recess had taught her the value of preparedness. She cleaned the scrape with an antiseptic wipe, applied a bandage, pressed it down firmly. He let her. She sat back and looked at her painting, which was still on the table where she'd left it. The building with the heart, the lines reaching outward, the small figure at the center. "I was thinking," she said, "while you were up there. I was thinking about what the painting means, yeah? I was thinking that the lines, the lifelines, they don't just go out. They come back too, like circulation. It goes out and it comes back." She tilted her head. "The building takes care of the people, and the people take care of the building. It goes both ways." He looked at the painting. He thought about the systems he'd repaired that week. The seal in the fountain, the junction box on 7, the insulation in the auxiliary duct, the thousands of small interventions, over the years in building after building, that kept structures functional, kept people safe, kept the ordinary machinery of daily life running without incident. He thought about Carol, and what she would have said about a 10-year-old who articulated circulatory theory in the context of building maintenance. She would have laughed. The good kind. The kind that meant she was proud. "It does go both ways," he said. Emily nodded, satisfied. Outside the atrium windows, the last of the November afternoon was going down behind the Dallas skyline. The light had turned orange and then red, and was moving toward the deep blue of early evening. Above them, on 12, the emergency was over. The smoke was gone. The systems were running clean. And somewhere in the building, in the service corridors, behind the panels, in the ducts and wiring and mechanical bones of Caldwell Tower, there was evidence of a man's work, documented, time-stamped, thorough, unseen by almost everyone, which was, in the end, exactly how it was supposed to be. That was the job, that was always the job, the man in the walls. The fire department arrived at 6:03, 2 engines. Standard response for a commercial building smoke call. Captain Laura Clark led the sweep team through the main entrance, while her crew took the service stairs. She was 41, 15 years on the job, the kind of person who walked into smoky rooms the way other people walked into grocery stores. Purposeful, unhurried, already calculating. Kenneth met her at the 12th floor landing. She looked at him, at the maintenance uniform, at the scrape on his knuckles, now bandaged. "You the one who called it in?" "My supervisor did. I was on site, walk me through it," he did. Concisely. The sensor malfunction, the insulation slip in the auxiliary duct, the kitchen flare, the shutter issue, the repairs. He gave her the sequence in the order it had happened, the way he'd been trained to give situation reports. Bottom line first, supporting details second, no editorializing. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at him for a moment. "The manual override on the shutter," she said. "You isolated the relay before reversing the motor command." "Yes. If you'd reversed without isolating, the oscillating signal would have fought the command and the motor could have burned out." "That's right. Most people don't know that. Most people haven't read the maintenance history on those shutters." She wrote something in her report log. "You have documentation on the sensor report from last Friday?" Filed at 11:14 a.m. Management response at 11:52. Both time-stamped in the building maintenance system. She wrote that down too, the duct repair you did this morning. Monday. That's documented? Completion report filed at 8:52 a.m. Photographs included. She stopped writing, looked at him directly. "You reported a safety issue. Management deferred it. You came in early Monday and fixed what you could fix within your authority. Then you fixed the rest when it became an emergency tonight." "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment. "Your documentation is going into our official incident report," she said. "Every timestamp, every communication. The whole sequence." A pause. "That matters for how this gets classified, I understand." She nodded once, then turned to direct her team through the kitchen sweep. He stood in the service corridor as the crew moved past him. They were thorough and efficient, and they found nothing he hadn't already found. The kitchen was clear. The duct system was stable. The shutter was locked in the open position, awaiting a proper motor inspection. When the sweep was complete, Laura Clark came back. "We're clearing the scene," she said. "Building management's going to want to talk to you." "I know, for what it's worth." She paused, like she was choosing whether to say the next part. She decided to. "The way you managed that shutter, the way you sequenced the evacuation before the alarm even triggered, that's not maintenance training." He looked at her. "No," he said. "It's not." She nodded slowly. "Army? Yes. Combat? 3 tours." She absorbed that. "My brother did too," she said. "He says the building reading never leaves you." "It doesn't." She capped her pen. "Take care of that hand." She walked back toward her team. Kenneth stood in the service corridor alone. The building hummed around him. The same low, constant hum it always had. Vents running, elevators moving. The mechanical pulse of a structure that was. Because of work done early on a Monday morning, and work done again in an emergency on a Friday evening, running the way it was supposed to run, he thought about what Laura had said. The building reading never leaves you. She was right. You learned to read terrain in the places he'd been, and then you read it everywhere, forever. A hotel lobby, a shopping mall, a restaurant on a Friday night. You always knew the exits. You always noted the structural elements. You always registered the small wrongnesses before they became big ones. It wasn't heroism. It was just a thing that had been built into him. He picked up his tool bag, went downstairs to find Emily. The atrium had quieted. The art event had officially ended. The panic had seen to that. But Jess had stayed with the children, keeping things calm, keeping the space from tipping into something worse. Parents had come and gone. Most of the tables were still set up, painting still spread out, brushes still in their jars of water. Emily was sitting at her table when Kenneth came through the door. She looked up. Stood. Didn't run this time. She was working hard at being 10.5, which apparently meant measured responses to emotional situations. She walked to him with the careful dignity of someone practicing composure. Then she reached out and took his uninjured hand. That was enough. They walked back to her table together. She sat down. He stood beside her. The atrium was not empty. Several families had stayed. Parents who'd been in the building during the incident, whose children had been at the event, who were waiting for the all-clear from building security before leaving. A few Crown Room staff members had come down from 12, still in their work uniforms, some of them visibly shaken. And there were people talking, not loudly, in the quiet, overlapping way people talked when they'd just been through something and were processing it together. He heard fragments. The maintenance guy, he went in before the alarm. Some said he fixed the shutter by hand. Kevin told me he just walked into the kitchen and took over. He didn't pay close attention to any of it. He was watching Emily study her painting. She was looking at it the way she'd looked at it on Thursday evening, from a slight distance, with her head tilted, doing that final assessment that artists apparently did when they were deciding whether a thing was finished. "It's still right," she said. Not to him exactly. More to herself. "Yeah," he said anyway. She turned to look at him, directly, the dark brown eyes doing their full inventory. "Are you tired? A little? The good kind or the bad kind?" He thought about that. It was a real question for her. She'd grown up watching him come home from days that left different things on his face, and she'd learned to distinguish between the tired that came from hard work well done, and the tired that came from something heavier. "The good kind," he said. She nodded, satisfied. From behind him he heard a voice he recognized. "Mr. Lee." He turned. Nicole Torres was standing 10 feet away. She was still in her Crown Room server uniform. White shirt, black apron, name tag slightly askew. She was 24 or 25, he thought. He'd seen her on 12 during his maintenance rounds over the past few months. But they'd never spoken beyond the polite nod of people who occupied the same space without occasion to interact. She was holding her hands in front of her, clasped. Tight. "I wanted to. I needed to say something," she said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. "When the smoke started, I froze. I didn't know what to do. And you came through and you just..." She stopped, swallowed. "You told me to stay low and move toward the east exit, and I did it and I got out." He looked at her. "You would have gotten out anyway," he said. "You just needed a direction." "I don't know that." "I do." She pressed her lips together. "I've been serving in that restaurant for 2 years. I've done the fire safety training. I know where the exits are. And I still just..." Stood there, her eyes were bright. "You didn't stand there. Different training," he said simply. "Is that all it is?" He considered that. Training is practice under pressure. Enough times, in enough situations, and the freeze response gets shorter. That's all it is. You can build it. She looked at him for a moment. Were you scared? Of what specifically? Going into the kitchen. Going back in after the evacuation. He thought about the honest answer. I was calculating, he said. When you're calculating, there's not much room left for scared. She nodded slowly. Unclenched her hands. Thank you, she said. I know that probably doesn't. It does, he said. Thank you for saying it. She nodded again. Looked at Emily, who had been watching the exchange with the careful attention she brought to things she deemed important. Is this your daughter? Emily, he said. Emily gave a small wave. Nicole smiled, genuinely, the kind that rearranged her whole face. The painting is beautiful, she said. Then she turned and walked back toward the small group of Crown Room staff near the east wall. Emily watched her go. She meant it, Emily said. I know. About the painting and about the other thing, I know. Emily picked up a clean brush and turned it in her fingers. Not painting, just holding it. Thinking, Dad, she said, yeah, I'm glad you were here today. He put his hand on the top of her head. Just for a moment. Me too, Em. He heard Gary Young before he saw him. Not the voice. Gary wasn't speaking. But the quality of attention in the room shifted in a specific way. The kind of shift that happened when someone with authority entered a space, not announced authority, not performed authority, but the real thing. The kind that people responded to, without being told to. Kenneth turned. Gary was coming from the direction of the main elevator bank. He was 67 and moved like someone who'd been fit for decades and hadn't entirely surrendered to age. His suit jacket was off. His left sleeve had the smudge on it from earlier. His tie was loosened. He was looking for someone. He found Kenneth. He walked over without hesitation. Stopped 3 feet away. Looked at him with the same quality of attention he'd used in the restaurant. That particular focused observation, gathering data. Then he looked at Emily. Something in his expression adjusted. Softened, slightly, the way expressions did when they encountered something unexpected and found it disarming. Your daughter? He said. Emily, Kenneth said. Emily looked up at Gary. Assessed him with the unself-conscious directness of a child who hadn't yet learned to pretend she wasn't evaluating people. Hi, she said. Hello, Emily. Gary's voice was measured but not stiff. He'd been around children enough to know not to perform warmth. Is that your painting? Yes, he looked at it. Took it in. What is it? It's the building. With a circulatory system, a pause. Tell me about it, Emily explained. The heart at the center, the lines as lifelines, the figure at the junction point. She used the same words she'd used with Kenneth, but added the part about circulation going both ways. The building taking care of the people taking care of the building. Gary listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. That's a serious idea, he said. For a painting, I'm a serious person, Emily said. And Gary Young, 67 years old, calmly regarded by most of Dallas as someone who did not find things casually amusing, made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then he turned back to Kenneth. I need to talk to you, he said. Quiet, direct. Not a question. Kenneth looked at Emily. 5 minutes? She waved him off with the magnanimous patience of someone who had important painting business to attend to. He and Gary stepped to the far side of the atrium, near the east windows. Far enough from the other people that their conversation would stay private. Gary turned to face him. Laura Clark gave me a preliminary summary, he said. Your documentation from Friday. The management response. What you did Monday morning. What you did tonight. Okay, she also told me what you did with the shutter panel. The relay isolation. A pause. She said most people don't know to do that. I read the maintenance history. She said that's what you told her. Gary looked at him steadily. I read maintenance histories too, when I was active. On ships, on installations, on anything that I was responsible for keeping operational. He paused. The men who read maintenance histories and then did something with the information were the ones I kept close. Kenneth didn't say anything. What branch? Gary said. There it was. The same question Laura Clark had asked. The same question Kenneth suspected, that Gary had been working toward since the moment he'd watched him at the shutter panel. Army, Kenneth said. Staff Sergeant, tours? 3. 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, combat engineer? Yes, sir, the sir came out clean, not performed. Just the residue of a habit that hadn't fully faded. Gary's jaw tightened slightly, not in displeasure. In recognition. What unit? Kenneth told him. Gary was quiet for a moment. I know that unit, he said. The words were measured, careful, like he was placing them deliberately. I read operational reports from that unit. During my last posting, 2009 through 2011, Kenneth looked at him. I know what that unit did in Fallujah, Gary said, and in the Kunar province. He paused. I know what the combat engineers in that unit did specifically. The clearing work, under fire, in conditions that, he stopped. I know what that was. The atrium was quiet around them, the hum of the building. The distant sound of Emily asking Jess a question about cadmium yellow. Kenneth held Gary's gaze. That was a long time ago, he said. Service doesn't expire, Gary said. What a man does under that kind of pressure. What he's willing to do, what he's capable of doing, that doesn't go away. It becomes who he is. Kenneth thought about that. About Roy on the corner of Maple and Henderson. About what Roy had done on the USS Sanctuary and how the world saw him now. About whether the world's vision of a person was ever actually accurate. Sometimes the person it becomes, Kenneth said, is someone the world doesn't look at twice. Gary was quiet for a moment. I looked, he said. Twice. Timothy Clark appeared from the service corridor entrance at 7:13, red-faced, slightly out of breath, the way Tim always was when he'd been moving fast and worrying simultaneously. He stopped when he saw Gary. Mr. Young. The shift in Tim's voice was immediate and involuntary. The adjustment of a man who just realized his boss's boss was standing 10 feet away. I didn't know you were in the building. I had a meeting on 8 this afternoon, Gary said. I was at dinner when the situation developed. Of course. Sir Tim looked at Kenneth, then back at Gary. Trying to read the room. Your man here, Gary said, reported a safety issue on Friday morning. Management overruled him. Tim's face did something complicated. Yes. That's documented. He came in early Monday and did the repairs within his authority. He documented that too. Yes, sir. When the situation escalated tonight, he managed the kitchen evacuation, corrected the shutter malfunction, and repaired the duct junction, while the kitchen was still producing smoke, and I know, Tim said quietly. I was on the radio with him. Gary looked at Tim directly. Why did management defer the Friday repair? There was a dinner event. Private booking. That was the reason? That was the reason given. Yes, sir. Gary's expression didn't change. That was, Kenneth thought, almost more unsettling than if it had. I want the full communication chain on my desk Monday morning, Gary said. Every message, every timestamp, every name. Yes, sir. And I want to understand what process allowed a documented safety concern to be overridden in favor of a dinner booking. I understand. Because the answer to that question is going to tell me whether this was one person making a bad call or a system producing bad outcomes. He paused. If it's the system, we fix the system. Tim nodded. He looked at Kenneth once more. There was something in his expression, not guilt exactly, more like the look of a man who'd known something was wrong and had lived in the space between knowing and acting, and was now reckoning with what that cost. Lee, he said, Tim, I should have pushed harder on Friday. Kenneth looked at him. At the honest discomfort on Tim's face. You were between two calls, Kenneth said. I know that doesn't make it right. No, but I documented everything. That's why we document. Tim nodded slowly. Then he stepped back, giving them space, and moved toward the building security team near the main entrance. Gary watched him go. He's a decent man, Gary said. Caught in a structure that made it easy to make the wrong choice. Most people aren't in bad structures because they're bad people, Kenneth said. Gary looked at him. No, they're not. A pause. That's a generous way to think about it. It's an accurate way. Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face Kenneth fully. I want to offer you something, he said. And I want you to know it's a real offer, not a gesture. Kenneth waited, facilities director for the tower. The position's been open for 8 months. I've been waiting for the right person. He paused. Or, if that's not what you want, I have a consulting relationship with 2 other commercial properties in Dallas. Crisis response assessment, system vulnerability review. The kind of work you demonstrated you can do, not just with tools but with judgment. Kenneth looked at him. He thought about the offer. He let himself think about it genuinely, not reflexively. The money would be different. The title would be different. The way people in restaurants would look at him would be different. He looked across the atrium at Emily. She was talking to Jess, gesturing at the painting, explaining something. Her braid had started to come loose. It did that by end of day always, no matter how carefully he tied it off. She had a small smear of cadmium yellow on her right forearm that she hadn't noticed. She looked over at that moment and found him watching. She raised one eyebrow, the look that said, Are you okay? Do you need anything? I'm here if you do. 10 years old. I appreciate it, Kenneth said. I want you to know I mean that. It's a real offer and I'm taking it seriously. But Gary said, this job, my hours. I drop Emily off at 7:45 and I pick her up at 3:30. I make it to her soccer games on Saturdays. I was here today when she needed me to be here. He paused. That's not an accident. That's the whole architecture of how I've built things. Gary said nothing. I know what I walked away from when I left the army, Kenneth said. That was a choice. This is a choice too. I'm not asking anyone to understand it. But it's not a mistake. Gary looked at him for a long moment. How long has her mother been gone? He asked quietly. Kenneth went still for just a second. Then, 7 years, and you've been doing this. All of it. Alone, not alone. With her, Gary looked at Emily again. At the painting. At the small figure at the center of the building's circulatory system. Touching the wall. Holding things together, the office stays open, Gary said finally. Whenever. If the architecture changes, I'll remember that. Make sure you do. He paused. Men like you are rare, Mr. Lee. The world produces very few people who do the right thing when no one is watching, document it carefully, and then show up again the next day and do it again. He let that settle. That's not a small thing. Even when the world treats it like one. Kenneth looked at him. Those words landed somewhere, not because he needed them. He'd gotten clear a long time ago on not needing external confirmation to know his own worth. That particular work had been done, slowly and without fanfare, in the years after Carol died and the years before Emily grew old enough to do the confirming herself. But there was something different about being seen clearly by someone who had the credentials to see. Gary understood what the insignia on his wrist meant. Gary had read the operational reports. Gary had stood in rooms where men like Kenneth were the reason the room stayed standing. He saw not just what Kenneth did. He saw what it cost. Thank you, Kenneth said. Gary nodded once. Then he did something Kenneth hadn't anticipated. He stood straight, shoulders back, chin level, gaze forward, and he raised his right hand to his brow, clean, precise. The salute of someone who had given it and received it in contexts where it meant something specific and irreversible. The atrium was not silent. There were still people talking, still children finishing paintings, still the ambient hum of a building going about its business. But something changed in the room anyway, the way things change when a true thing happens in a public space. Not because everyone notices, but because the people who do notice feel it land, and their response creates a kind of ripple. Nicole Torres, standing with the Crown Room staff near the east wall, went still. Tim Clark, halfway across the atrium, turned. Jess, at the painting tables, looked up. Emily looked up. She looked at the man saluting her father. Then she looked at her father. Kenneth did not return the salute. That was not evasion. It was not false modesty. He'd put the salute away with the uniform, with the rank, with the chapter of his life that had been necessary and real and costly and finished. He simply held Gary's gaze and gave a single, slow nod. Gary lowered his hand. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Gary said, quietly enough that only Kenneth heard, "Thank you for your service. All of it. The visible kind and the invisible kind." Kenneth nodded again. Gary straightened his jacket. Looked around the atrium once more. The painter, the filing system, the building itself. Then he walked toward the elevator bank. Kenneth watched him go. Sandra Anderson found him before he left. He was at the main entrance, Emily's painting rolled carefully in a cardboard tube under his arm. Emily herself walking beside him with her backpack and her end-of-week exhaustion. Sandra came from the direction of the elevators. She was still in the blazer from the dinner. There was a faint gray smudge on the right sleeve. Ash or dust from when she'd crouched low in the corridor. She hadn't cleaned it off. He wondered if that was deliberate. She stopped 6 feet away. Emily looked at her, then at Kenneth, then stepped slightly behind him, not hiding. Emily didn't hide, but giving him space. She understood, without being told, that this was his conversation. Sandra looked at him directly. "I've been trying to figure out what to say for the last hour," she said. "I've had 3 versions in my head and they all sound wrong." He waited. "Last Friday." She stopped, started again. "I made a decision about who you were before you said 10 words. I did it based on," she paused, chose the word carefully, "based on what I thought I was seeing, a beat. And then I said something that I said loud enough to make sure other people heard it, because I wanted. I don't know what I wanted. To establish something. To be the one who was doing the leaving, not the one being left." She pressed her lips together briefly. "That's honest. It's not flattering, but it's honest." He said nothing. "Then tonight I watched you go into that kitchen," she said. "I watched you work that panel. I watched you." She stopped again. "I heard Gary Young tell my team what you did. And I heard Laura Clark's crew talking in the corridor." She looked at him steadily. "And I understood something that I should have understood a week ago, if I'd been paying any attention at all." "What did you understand?" he said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. "That the most competent person in the building tonight wasn't in the dining room," she said. That the person who kept 40 people from being trapped in a smoke-filled restaurant was the person I walked out on. A pause, and that I made that judgment in about 30 seconds, based on things that had nothing to do with who you actually are. She held his gaze. I'm sorry, she said. That's the version I kept coming back to, just that. I'm sorry for what I said, and I'm sorry for how I said it. He looked at her. He thought about what he wanted to say. He thought about Roy on his corner, about the long, slow accumulation of being looked past, about how many times in how many rooms men who'd done what he'd done came home and became invisible, and how that invisibility hardened into something over time. Not bitterness, exactly, but a kind of resigned certainty about what the world was willing to see. He thought about Emily's painting, about the figure at the center, about lines that went out and came back. I heard you, he said. I mean that. I'm not saying it to end the conversation. I heard what you said and I believe you mean it. Sandra exhaled slightly. That's not forgiveness, he said. Not yet. That's just acknowledgement. I know forgiveness takes longer. For me, anyway. That might be a limitation. It's not a limitation, she said quietly. It's fair. He looked at her for a moment longer. The person who told you I wasn't the first, he said. The older server. That was true, wasn't it? It wasn't a question. He saw the answer in her face before she spoke. Yes, she said. That's worth sitting with, he said. Not as an accusation, just worth sitting with. She nodded, slowly. The way people nodded when they were accepting something they didn't want to accept. He shifted the painting tube under his arm. I hope the rest of your Friday evening is better than the first half, he said. Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, more like the faint recognition of grace being offered in an unexpected form. You too, she said. He nodded once, turned, put his hand on Emily's shoulder, and walked toward the main doors. Emily waited until they were through the doors and on the sidewalk. Then she said, Was that her? Yeah, she apologized. She did. Emily was quiet for half a block. What did you say? I said I heard her. Another half block. That was good, Emily said finally. That was the right thing, yeah? You didn't pretend everything was fine. But you didn't be mean either. That's what I was going for. She slipped her hand into his. They walked. The pizza place was 4 blocks from the tower. Red checkered tablecloths, candles in old wine bottles, a menu on a chalkboard that hadn't meaningfully changed in 15 years. The owner, a man named Paul, had been there since the 1990s and operated the place with the exact level of effort required to keep it excellent without making it precious. Emily ordered the margarita. Kenneth ordered the sausage. They got a basket of garlic bread and 2 sodas. It was 8:30 on a Friday night, and they had the corner table to themselves. Emily ate with the focused efficiency of a person who had used a lot of energy and needed to replenish it. Kenneth watched her and thought about nothing in particular. Just the dinner, just the table, just this. After a while, Emily set down her slice and wiped her hands on a napkin. Can I ask you something? Yeah, the man. Who saluted you? He waited. He knew something about you, she said. Something from before. From the army, yes. What did he know? He thought about how to answer that. How to give her something real without giving her the parts that were too heavy for a Friday night dinner. He knew about the unit I served with, he said. The work we did. Some of it was difficult work, the kind that requires a specific kind of training. And he understood what that meant. What kind of work? Clearing paths, he said. Making things safe for other people to move through. Emily looked at him. Processing, like what you do here, she said slowly. In the building, he hadn't thought about it exactly that way before. Yeah, he said. Like what I do here. She picked up her slice again. Chewed thoughtfully. Did you like it? She asked. The army? Parts of it. What parts? Knowing what I was doing mattered. Knowing the people beside me were depending on me and I was depending on them. He paused. The clarity of it. When things are very serious, everything becomes clear. You know exactly what's important. What made you leave? He looked at her. He thought about Carol. About the phone call he'd gotten at an outpost in Kunar province, patched through a satellite connection that kept cutting out. About the way the world had rearranged itself around that call. About what had been important before and what was important after. Your mom got sick, he said simply. I came home. Emily was quiet. You never went back, she said. No, do you wish you had? He held her gaze. Those dark brown eyes, exactly Carol's. Not once, he said. Not for a single second. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. The small, certain nod she used when something had been confirmed to her satisfaction. Good, she said, and went back to her pizza. He watched her eat. He thought about Gary's offer. Facilities director. The money, the title, the way people would look at him. He'd given it real consideration. the way he gave real consideration to anything important. And the answer was still the same. Not because the offer wasn't good. It was good. But because the architecture of his life had been built around one central load-bearing fact. Emily needed him present, not just nearby. And the job he had, the hours it gave him, the proximity to her school, the ability to disappear for 20 minutes to watch her soccer practice when nothing urgent was pulling him elsewhere. That wasn't a consolation prize. That was the design. He'd come home from 3 deployments. He'd buried his wife at 38. He'd built a life out of the pieces that remained. And the life he'd built was small in the way that mattered and large in the ways that counted. He wasn't invisible. He was just seen by the right person. After dinner, they walked home. The November air had sharpened into actual cold. The flat, waiting cold of Dallas finally committing. Emily walked with her hands in her jacket pockets, the painting tube under Kenneth's arm between them. 3 blocks from the apartment, she said, "Dad? Yeah. Do you think Roy will be there tomorrow morning?" He looked at her. He hadn't told her about Roy. He'd never mentioned Roy. But children saw more than adults thought they did. And Emily had been walking to school with him for years. "Probably," he said. "Can we get him the egg biscuit with the hot sauce packets this time?" He always looks at them and doesn't take them. He looked at her. He doesn't take them because he doesn't want to seem greedy. "I know, but maybe if we just put them in the bag without making it a thing, he'd have them, and it wouldn't have to be a thing." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "We can do that," she nodded, filed it away, moved on to something else. He kept walking. He thought about what she'd said at breakfast on Saturday. "You're someone who figures out what's broken and fixes it. Even when nobody asks you to. Even when nobody sees you doing it." She'd been talking about the building, but she'd also been talking about him. The whole of him. Not just the maintenance technician, not just the veteran, not just the widower. The whole person who got up before dawn and made pancake stars and braided hair and put egg biscuits next to a man on a corner and went into smoky kitchens without being asked and came back downstairs to his daughter who was waiting. The person who stayed, not because staying was easier. It wasn't, most days, but because some things were worth staying for. The apartment was warm when they got in. Emily kicked off her shoes at the door. He'd given up on the shoe rack and went straight to the bathroom to wash her hands. His phone never stopped ringing. He set the painting tube carefully against the wall and hung up their jackets. She came out of the bathroom, padded into the kitchen, and opened the fridge with the authority of someone who had been thinking about a specific snack for at least 4 blocks. "There's leftover apple from yesterday," she announced. "I know, that's mine. I know that too." She took it out, sat at the kitchen counter, ate it. He made tea. They sat together in the kitchen, the apartment's particular quiet settling around them. Not empty, but full of the specific texture of 2 people who knew each other so completely that silence had become a form of conversation. After a while, Emily looked at her painting tube against the wall. "I'm going to hang it in the hall," she said. "Okay, right across from your old photo of the unit." "The group one?" He looked at her. "So they're across from each other," she said. The before and the after. He looked at the hallway. At the framed photograph he'd hung there 6 years ago, after a period of not being sure he wanted it up at all. 12 men, desert light, most of them squinting. Some of them gone now, in one way or another. "Yeah," he said. "That works." Emily finished her apple, rinsed the container, put it in the recycling. "I'm going to bed," she said. She came around the counter and hugged him, brief but complete. "Good job today, Dad." He held her for a second. "Good job yourself," he said. She went down the hall. He heard her door close, her light on, visible under the door, while she did whatever the pre-sleep ritual was tonight. He stood at the kitchen counter with his tea. Outside, Dallas went on. Traffic on the cross street. A dog barking 2 buildings over. The low, steady sound of a city that didn't stop for any particular thing. He thought about the building. The system's running clean tonight. The sensor stable. The shutter ready for its motor inspection Monday morning. The documentation filed and timestamped, and now part of an official record that would require Gary Young's management team to answer specific questions. He thought about Roy and the hot sauce packets. He thought about Nicole Torres, and the steady voice she'd found on the way to the east exit, and the way she'd said you can build it back to him, like she was keeping it for later. He thought about Gary Young's salute, the precision of it, the weight of what it acknowledged. He thought about Carol, about whether she would have been surprised by today. He decided she wouldn't have been. She'd always seen this in him. Not the specific skills, but the underlying thing. The refusal to look away from what needed doing. the patience with invisibility, the choice, made fresh every morning, to be present and useful and real. You're going to be the same person at 60 that you are at 34, she'd told him once. That's either a warning or a promise. He'd thought about that a lot over the years. He turned off the kitchen light, walked down the hall, stopped at Emily's door. The light was off now. He could hear her breathing, the slow, even rhythm of sleep. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to his room, sat on the edge of the bed, reached into his shirt pocket and took out the drawing she'd made Friday morning, now worn at the fold lines from a day of being carried. Get em, dad the figure, head up, chest out. He looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it carefully, put it in the drawer of his bedside table. Not in the trash, not in a file somewhere. In reach, where he could find it when he needed it. He lay back. Outside, the city kept going. Inside, the apartment was quiet and warm and exactly the size it needed to be. And Kenneth Lee, staff sergeant, retired, veteran of 3 deployments in places that had no good names. Widower, father, maintenance technician, the man in the walls of Caldwell Tower, who had read the maintenance history and showed up early and fixed what could be fixed, and fixed the rest when it became necessary. The man who had been saluted in an atrium in front of people who would not forget it. The man who was going home tomorrow to get $4 egg biscuits with hot sauce packets on the side. That man closed his eyes and slept.